Joe, we continue on our deep dives tonight. We are going to stay in the SEC, talk about them Georgia Bulldogs. Joe, everybody believes that Georgia is going to be or potentially can be the national champion at SEC Media Days. Everybody picked them, or I say everybody, but majority of people picked them to be the champion. They return a lot. They add a lot of really big pieces, in my opinion. I think that defense is going to be just as good as it's ever been. Joe, I got to admit, I said it last week after we got back from New York. I'm finding a very hard time not picking the Georgia Bulldogs early to be my national champion. But we do play a season. What are your thoughts on Kirby going into year 9?
Yeah, I'm sure that we're going to do a segment that's going to – or not I'm sure. We will do a segment that is going to be our national championship picks, our playoff predictions. All of that is probably going to be last 2 weeks leading up to the season. Georgia's going to be my pick. I don't think that there's any point to overthink this. I picked them last year. If it wasn't for some injuries late in Alabama surging when they did, they probably would have beaten Michigan in the national title game, and they would have gone on to win 3 straight national titles.
I agree.
I look at this team front to back, man, and they improved from last year. They lost a few guys, but they have gotten really significantly stronger the way that they developed through the portal. I don't know if you'll agree with this take, but I think they have the best offensive line in the country. I look at how stout they are. Maybe they can compete with LSU, and it's a close one, but I think that Ernest Green is a budding young star at left tackle who's going to be a great guard in the NFL. Dylan Fairchild's a quality player. Tate Radledge is one of my favorite interior offensive linemen in the country. And then Xavier Truss has just been a experienced veteran for that group that has seen a lot of different roles. Because of how good their offensive line is, knowing that they've got Trevor Etienne, and more importantly, knowing that they have one of the most decisive and best decision-making quarterbacks in Carson Beck, who was able to ascend and rise to the occasion when a number of his key targets in Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey were unavailable, knowing that he was able to accomplish everything that he did last season makes me feel optimistic that they're going to go on yet another Death Star 13-0 national championship run.
I'll get to that in a minute. Joe, I think that Trevor Etienne might have been the best fit for any player to a school in the country. Because, look, there was something offensively that I did think at times was lacking from Georgia. Now, it's not like their running game wasn't good. They were top 20 in the country in rushing yards per game. They were 20th. But, Joe, you talk about that offensive line for a second. Buddy, now we got to bring in Etienne. And I think that helps a quarterback going into year 2 like Carson Beck. Yep. Look, I thought Carson Beck was one of the better quarterbacks in the country last year. Didn't probably have the touchdowns that maybe he would want, 24. It didn't matter. The kid was really polished and did some really good things. Joe, offensively, people forget last year they were top 5 in offense. Like, people forget how good they were and then added Colby Young and added Trevor Etienne. Joe, I can't believe I'm leading off a segment talking about Georgia and not mentioning what they've done defensively. You bring in a guy like Colby Young, you have Levitt, you have Dylan Bell. Joe, their receiver core is not that bad. Now, maybe not that premier guy that you would –
to rephrase that, their receiving core is really underrated.
I
could be really good.
Joe, they could be a top 5 offense again. Okay, so you're talking about a team last year, Joe, that lost 1 game. If I'm not mistaken, aren't they 29-1 in their last 30 games? Yep. 29-1 in their last 30 games. I'm trying to find holes. I don't know from top to bottom if I can find one. Now, run defense has got to be a little bit better, okay, at times. I'm nitpicking. Ultimately nitpicking. Joe, they were 18th in the country in rushing yards allowed last season. I think people, when they think about Kirby, they think about Georgia, they want to look defense, D-line, front 7. No, sir. You better start looking at this offense and how good they can be. Second year under Bobo with Carson Beck. Joe, let me ask you like this, because we'll get to defense in just a moment, but Joe, do they have holes offensively? And if they do, where is it?
Well, so this is kind of what I've come together with. I think this is the best offensive unit that Kirby has ever had. I think better than any of the Jake Fromm teams. I think better than any of the Stetson Bennett teams. I know that there were instances where there were premier athletes at a number of positions, like Amarius Mims and Brock Bowers, who were part of last year's team. But this one,
I mean, Joe, they also had A.D. Mitchell. If he doesn't hit the portal, then what? You know, like, so.
This feels like one of the most balanced offenses that they've had. And I think that because of that balance and that depth, it elevates their level of play. And more importantly, it all comes down to that offensive line that I mentioned, where I feel like they're going to be so good and so consistent with limiting the amount of pressures and the amount of penetration that they see on every given snap. They're going to have an easy time running the ball. They're going to have an easy time passing the ball. And it feels even crazier to make this statement because you pointed out they were a top 5 offense last year. How much better can you actually get? I don't know if they'll ever ascend to being that number 1 offense because there's other teams out there that are just a little bit more beat you over the top and splash play. Like Ohio State's going to probably fit that category more. Oregon's probably going to fit that category more. But their steadiness and their consistency is what is going to help them win a national title. Their offense just needs to be strong because we know that their identity is always going to be on defense.
So you bring up an interesting point. If there is, I don't want to say a weakness, but something that I question, Joe, do they have the explosiveness on the outside? Like, do they have somebody that can take the top off the defense and they go long to? You know, Ladd McConkey, I mean, people didn't realize how like fast he was or good he was. Goes to compound. What was it, like a 4.34 or 4.44 or something?
He was fast. I think it was a 4.3 kid. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, 4.3 kid. People were like, "Hey, Miss Mahonky kid can run." That would be the question that I have about explosiveness. Obviously, Brock Bowers not being there. I think they're going to find somebody. I don't know who it is. Maybe it's Colby Young, right? Like we talked about Miami a while back, and you know maybe Colby Young. I know he's a possession guy, but
yeah, he's more of a big body type of a dude.
Dude separated a lot of times on film, though. And that's the big question for me. I mean, and look, he got Tyler Van Dyke throwing to him too. Now, you got Dominic Lovett, who's coming into a second year here, who could potentially be that guy. I just think all around they are the most balanced offense from top to bottom that you know that's going to be there. Joe, moving over to them defensively.
Yep.
Hot take: best D-line in the country.
I'm trying to think who else might. Okay, wait. There's only one team that I would push back. That is even
push back.
Ohio State. I think Ohio State's is better.
And
I could argue that Michigan's is a little bit better.
I had this same debate that you did. However, I'm just not so sure. I said D-line. Joe, you know all those 5-stars that didn't play last year? They're sophomores now.
That's true.
And they got 3 of them.
There's guys that we didn't even get to see. So it's a very good point.
Guys that we didn't get to see. And you bring back Mikael Williams. Joe, yeah. I was watching a lot of Georgia stuff. They defensively in the run game, they bring back Stackhouse. They bring back Brinson.
Fine. I think Stackhouse is he's just kind of a space heater, which is to his role. He's not Jalen Carter though. You know, this is
fair.
Jordan Davis.
Fair. I will remind people how big he got down the stretch, though. I mean, down the stretch, I mean, my man could be an unmovable force at times, too.
So let me elaborate on the point that you're making. I think at this given point in time, we have to give that nod to Ohio State because they're bringing back production that we've seen. But I could totally see by like week 8, we're not saying that Georgia's defensive line is the best in the country. And it is for the fact of...
Especially if they run through Texas, and we'll talk about them in a minute.
Yeah.
So Texas has got to find a running game.
I also think that's going to be important to talk about. But I also think that a lot of their potential performance on their defensive line, which has always been the identity for the defense in general, it's just been big, mauling, 5-star guys, freakish athletes. it all kind of comes down to what happens with Michael Williams. There is a very large variance from the NFL draft community on where he's going to go. Some people think that he's the best prospect, better than James Pierce Jr. Some people think that he is unactualized and he's going to be an early second-round pick. There is a very wide range of debate. And I think that if he does take that step forward of producing more, last year he didn't really produce. He was kind of stayed stagnant from that freshman season. Such a gifted
and
player.
we were very big on him. Very big on him. Him and Harold Perkins, ironically, had the season where people were like, yeah, I mean, they're freakish athletes. They just didn't have the production. And I'm like, yeah, but they're still freaks of nature, and I'm like, okay. So your point is fair. I would concede fair. I still think that they're going to have the best because like when you go down depth piece, 5-star, 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 and I'm like, God damn. I mean, Joe, it doesn't stop. And then now you're getting into year 2 of these 5-star kids. And I'm like, yeah, who are these? Who's going to be the kid that I, just don't know about, that I'm not on the beat every day, so I'm not following this team religiously? Who's going to be the kid that is going to be the next superstar on that defensive line? Because you can only recruit that position so long and so well for there not to be somebody along this defensive line that just busts out and we're like, oh, shit, here he comes. And of course, here comes one. Kirby just plants these kids on trees. And so go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and the other thing, too, that like to provide context for the non-Georgia fans that are watching this segment or tuning in today that are like, oh, how good can this group be? 2023, they had a historic defensive line class that if it wasn't for the existence of that Texas A&M class from the year prior, 2 years prior, whenever that was,
would have been probably the best class of all time statistically.
So yeah, like potentially up there.
Beat off the D line there because there's like four up top.
These are 2 5-stars: Damon Wilson, Jordan Hall. Jordan Hall is like a dude. I watched his high school tape. That kid can freaking move, and he didn't get on the field. Gabe Harris was a 4-star. Samuel Mpemba, who is from St. Louis, Missouri, he was a high 4-star. There's a ton of linebackers, including C.J. Allen, who was so important. And we didn't even see Raylan Wilson get on the field, who was a 5-star linebacker. A.J. Harris is also a kid who is supposed to have a pretty prominent – oh, no, way he transferred. A.J. Harris transferred to Penn State. I completely forgot about that. I'm mixing up who – there's a damn kid in the 2024 class that's supposed to – my point is that grouping of 2023 kids that you brought up, those are all the names that we're going to be talking about.
We will see. So look, let me ask you this. To add on to this, Carson Beck has been, and unironically, I don't think people are talking enough about Carson Beck coming into the season. Mm-hmm. Am I crazy to think he's one of, like, people, maybe I'm wrong here. I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country, if not the best quarterback in the country. Am I seeing something wrong here? Like,
no.
Why is there not more chatter about Carson Beck? I know that there's some, but Joe, I mean, this kid's going into year 2. We saw a lot of the things that he did. I mean, he's going to be a big-time playmaker for them, obviously the most important position.
So, by the way, it was Ellis Robinson who's supposed to be a big deal for them. I think that, as we kind of always do in the preseason, we get caught up in the hype of, first of all, the existence of Shedeur Sanders has altered the conversation. That's a separate convo. I think that the traitsiness of a guy we're going to talk about in a second, of like a Quinn Ewers, of a Cam Ward, of Jackson Dart, those types of guys that have the tools but are maybe still developing, have really pushed down the convo on Carson Beck. But what we forget is that last year, there were a number of instances where things weren't going well and the offense was sputtering. Brock Bowers was out. Ladd McConkey was out. You were down to your 4th running back. The dude named Cash.
Guys like Dylan Bell were having to step up, right?
Who's the white running back that they have with last name Cash? What the heck is his name?
Oh, yeah, I forget. But
they were thin, though. And
yeah,
despite all of this,
they had a damn lot of injuries last year and still went undefeated.
There are plenty of other college quarterbacks on championship caliber teams in the recent past, that if they had the same level of injuries, would have folded. Like really would have really struggled, and we would have just been shaking our head saying that that's such a disappointment. He didn't do that. He kept the ship afloat. That to me is where I am so optimistic, because not only are they bringing back more health, but there's more depth at receiver. There's more depth at running back. So we're not going to have those same issues. There's plenty of talent. So if things go awry a little bit, guys get banged up, I want to see what Carson Beck does now that he's got a loaded house supporting him.
Well, and again, like I said in the beginning, you know why I'm so high on Carson Beck? Like, forget the draft prospect stuff, whatever. Dude, he might have the best running back in the conference. Like, behind this offensive line and what he's going to be able to spring, Trevor Etienne's going to, at minimum, be a top 3 back in the SEC. So, the running game is going to be something that definitely helps him more than it did a year ago. I'm not saying Milton wasn't bad, or I'm not saying any of that, but this kid is a game changer. Joe, down the stretch, I think his last 3 games, he had double-digit touchdowns. That's insane. Yeah. And so, by the way, that was, just throwing this out there, that was the Florida schedule and that Florida team that he was doing that with. What makes you think that what this kid's going to do behind the Georgia offensive line? So I'm like, oh, dude, they're going to do exactly what they always do. They're going to run the football effectively. They're going to hit the play action on you, and you're going to feel like you got to press yourself if like you're Josh Heupel, and then here comes their defense to lock you down. They put so much pressure on you by how good they are that you get out of your element. Golly, man, I don't know if I'm not going to pick him as my national champion. I'm still waiting to really think about Ohio State here, but God, they're going to be good.
I know we're kind of the kings of glazing Georgia, and I know that that's probably what we're getting labeled as often when we do the show.
Joe, you know what? We're 29-1. We're 29-1 when we pick Georgia.
Like God forbid that we can clearly see what the best team in the country is. Is Ohio State now much closer than they've ever been? Absolutely. Sure. They have narrowed the gap a ton. And the team that they had 2 years ago that they almost beat Georgia, I think the current team now is better than that Ohio State team from a couple of years ago, the current Ohio State team. There's potential for them to beat Georgia if they faced off with
I don't know, dog. CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud or Will Howard?
Well, you know how I would answer that question.
Okay,
because I'm not very excited by Will Howard. I'm obviously picking CJ Stroud, but their defensive line 2 years ago was not nearly as frightening as this upcoming one. I think that it's fair to project and say Ohio State could potentially play Georgia. We don't know what this playoff is going to end up unfolding like, if it will just be a 1 versus 2, but it is impossible to look at this team front to back and not acknowledge that they are built to win a national title. It is reminiscent to every damn national championship winning team that they've had since Kirby took over.
Well, of course, because it was the same team.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm very high on them. Anything else that we missed that you wanted to get about the Georgia Bulldogs?
No. Actually, last thought. It also kind of helps that they got a pretty light schedule. I feel like that they don't really have, except for Texas and Bama, they got a pretty very winnable schedule. No, even if they had some, sorry, let me rephrase it. If they had some deficiencies, I would still feel pretty confident about them blowing through most of their schedule.
It's definitely tougher than it was a year ago. Okay. But Joe, we're going to talk about Texas in a minute. That's not an easy road game.
No.
Right. And to be honest with you, there is something that we do need to see from Carson Beck. You know what that is? Win the real big one. Right? Like, we have not seen him.
I got to give him some grace. Because that game was brutal. They step into that game, and I think Amarius Mims went down, and Brock Bowers and Lamakaaki were all banged up for that game. Like, there was nothing that he could do in that situation.
Okay. Just remember that when you talk about Jalen Milroe.
What do you mean?
Milroe outplayed him. He had Tommy Reese.
He did. I'm very high on Jalen Milroe.
I know, but you weren't a year ago.
It's a very different circumstance.
Oh, You said last year J.J. McCarthy had
Wait.
a win.
Wait. Okay, we compare two scenarios of two different players in that football game. Who had their all of their offensive weapons in their offensive line, and who had a banged up roster? And it was
I would still say
we watched him sink and like desperately try to paddle to the shore the entire game for Carson Beck. That's what we watched.
I would say that Carson Beck still had a better offensive line last year, without question, and running game.
I disagree with that.
Proctor was not as good as some of these dudes up here. There were weaknesses.
He still had JC
McLaughlin, go back to that game. McLaughlin had 3 bad snaps in that game, Joe.
You were trying to convince me that you thought he was pretty good.
Well, I do think he's good. I just don't think he's a center.
Look, all I'm saying is I got to give him a little bit of grace because we watched that game and it was brutal watching Carson Beck try to do everything.
Sean D in the comments says no excuses. Beck did almost throw 3 picks in that SEC championship game.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.